We sent friendly messages, but, fearing to intrude upon some secret council, remained on board. Early on the third day, we had landed all the powder and rifles, and also a 6-pounder brass gun with its carriage, which we had subscribed together for a present for our friend. The afternoon was sultry. Ragged edges of black clouds peeped over the hills, and invisible thunderstorms circled outside, growling like wild beasts. We got the schooner ready for sea, intending to leave next morning at daylight. All day a merciless sun blazed down into the bay, fierce and pale, as if at white heat. Nothing moved on the land. The beach was empty, the villages seemed deserted. The trees, far off, stood in unstirring clumps as if painted. The white smoke of some invisible bush-fire spread itself low over the shores of the bay like a settling fog. Late in the day, 3 of Karain's chief men, dressed in their best and armed to the teeth, came off in a canoe, bringing a case of dollars. They were gloomy and languid, and told us they had not seen their Rajah for 5 days. No one had seen him. We settled all accounts, and after shaking hands in turn and in profound silence, they descended one after another into their boat, and were paddled to the shore, sitting close together, clad in vivid colors, with hanging heads. The gold embroideries of their jackets flashed dazzlingly as they went away, gliding on the smooth water, and not one of them looked back once. Before sunset, the growling clouds carried with a rush the ridge of hills, and came tumbling down the inner slopes. Everything disappeared. Black whirling vapors filled the bay, and in the midst of them the schooner swung here and there in the shifting gusts of wind. A single clap of thunder detonated in the hollow with a violence that seemed capable of bursting into small pieces the ring of high land, and a warm deluge descended. The wind died out. We panted in the close cabin. Our faces streamed. The bay outside hissed as if boiling. The water fell in perpendicular shafts as heavy as lead. It swished about the deck, poured off the spars, gurgled, sobbed, splashed, murmured in the blind night. Our lamp burned low. Hollis, stripped to the waist, lay stretched out on the lockers with closed eyes and motionless like a despoiled corpse. At his head Jackson twanged the guitar and gasped out in sighs a mournful dirge about hopeless love and eyes like stars. Then we heard startled voices on deck crying in the rain, hurried footsteps overhead, and suddenly Karain appeared in the doorway of the cabin. His bare breast and his face glistened in the light. His sarong, soaked, clung about his legs. He had his sheathed kriss in his left hand, and wisps of wet hair escaping from under his red kerchief, stuck over his eyes and down his cheeks. He stepped in with a headlong stride and looking over his shoulder like a man pursued. Hollis turned on his side quickly and opened his eyes. Jackson clapped his big hand over the strings, and the jingling vibration died suddenly. I stood up. "We did not hear your boat's hail," I exclaimed. "Boat? The man's swum off," drawled out Hollis from the locker. "Look at him." He breathed heavily, wild-eyed, while we looked at him in silence. Water dripped from him, made a dark pool, and ran crookedly across the cabin floor. We could hear Jackson, who had gone out to drive away our Malay seamen, from the doorway of the companion. He swore menacingly in the patter of a heavy shower, and there was a great commotion on deck. The watchmen, scared out of their wits by the glimpse of a shadowy figure leaping over the rail, straight out of the night, as it were, had alarmed all hands. Then Jackson, with glittering drops of water on his hair and beard, came back looking angry, and Hollis, who, being the youngest of us, assumed an indolent superiority, said without stirring, "Give him a dry sarong. Give him mine. It's hanging up in the bathroom." Karain laid the kriss on the table, hilt inwards, and murmured a few words in a strangled voice. "What's that?" asked Hollis, who had not heard. "He apologizes for coming in with a weapon in his hand," I said dazedly. "Ceremonious beggar." "Tell him we forgive a friend on such a night," drawled out Hollis. "What's wrong?" Karain slipped the dry sarong over his head, dropped the wet one at his feet, and stepped out of it. I pointed to the wooden armchair, his armchair. He sat down very straight, said, "Ha!" in a strong voice. A short shiver shook his broad frame. He looked over his shoulder uneasily, turned as if to speak to us, but only stared in a curious, blind manner, and again looked back. Jackson bellowed out, "Watch well on deck there!" heard a faint answer from above, and reaching out with his foot, slammed to the cabin door. "All right now," he said. Karain's lips moved slightly. A vivid flash of lightning made the two round stern ports facing him glimmer like a pair of cruel and phosphorescent eyes. The flame of the lamp seemed to wither into brown dust for an instant, and the looking-glass over the little sideboard leaped out behind his back in a smooth sheet of livid light. The roll of thunder came near, crashed over us. The schooner trembled, and the great voice went on, threatening terribly into the distance. For less than a minute a furious shower rattled on the decks. Karain looked slowly from face to face, and then the silence became so profound that we all could hear distinctly the two chronometers in my cabin ticking along with unflagging speed against one another. And we three, strangely moved, could not take our eyes from him. He had become enigmatical and touching, in virtue of that mysterious cause that had driven him through the night and through the thunderstorm to the shelter of the schooner's cuddy. Not one of us doubted that we were looking at a fugitive, incredible as it appeared to us. He was haggard as though he had not slept for weeks. He had become lean as though he had not eaten for days. His cheeks were hollow, his eyes sunk. The muscles of his chest and arms twitched slightly, as if after an exhausting contest. Of course, it had been a long swim off to the schooner, but his face showed another kind of fatigue, the tormented weariness, the anger and the fear of a struggle against a thought, an idea, against something that cannot be grappled, that never rests, a shadow, a nothing, unconquerable and immortal, that preys upon life. We knew it as though he had shouted it at us. His chest expanded time after time, as if it could not contain the beating of his heart. For a moment he had the power of the possessed, the power to awaken in the beholders wonder, pain, pity, and a fearful near sense of things invisible, of things dark and mute, that surround the loneliness of mankind. His eyes roamed about aimlessly for a moment, then became still. He said with effort, "I came here. I leaped out of my stockade as after a defeat. I ran in the night. The water was black. I left him calling on the edge of black water. I left him standing alone on the beach. I swam. He called out after me. I swam." He trembled from head to foot, sitting very upright and gazing straight before him. Left whom? Who called? We did not know. We could not understand. I said at all hazards, "Be firm." The sound of my voice seemed to steady him into a sudden rigidity. But otherwise he took no notice. He seemed to listen, to expect something for a moment, then went on. "He cannot come here, therefore I sought you, you men with white faces who despise the invisible voices. He cannot abide your unbelief and your strength." He was silent for a while, then exclaimed softly, "Oh, the strength of unbelievers!" "There's no one here but you, and we three," said Hollis quietly. He reclined with his head supported on elbow, and did not budge. "I know," said Karain. "He has never followed me here. Was not the wise man ever by my side? But since the old wise man who knew of my trouble has died, I have heard the voice every night. I shut myself up for many days in the dark. I can hear the sorrowful murmurs of women, the whisper of the wind, of the running waters, the clash of weapons in the hands of faithful men, their footsteps, and his voice, near, so, in my ear. I felt him near. His breath passed over my neck. I leaped out without a cry. All about me men slept quietly. I ran to the sea. He ran by my side without footsteps, whispering old words, whispering into my ear in his old voice. I ran into the sea. I swam off to you with my kriss between my teeth. Armed, I fled before a breath to you. Take me away to your land. The wise old man has died, and with him is gone the power of his words and charms. And I can tell no one. There is no one here faithful enough and wise enough to know. It is only near you, unbelievers, that my trouble fades like a mist under the eye of day." He turned to me. "With you I go," he cried in a contained voice. "With you, who know so many of us. I want to leave this land, my people. And him, there!" He pointed a shaking finger at random over his shoulder. It was hard for us to bear the intensity of that undisclosed distress. Hollis stared at him hard. I asked gently, "Where is the danger?" "Everywhere, outside this place," he answered mournfully. "In every place where I am. He waits for me on the paths, under the trees, in the place where I sleep. Everywhere but here." He looked round the little cabin, at the painted beams, at the tarnished varnish of bulkheads. He looked round as if appealing to all its shabby strangeness, to the disorderly jumble of unfamiliar things that belong to an inconceivable life of stress, of power, of endeavor, of unbelief, to the strong life of white men, which rolls on irresistible and hard on the edge of outer darkness. He stretched out his arms as if to embrace it, and us. We waited. The wind and rain had ceased, and the stillness of the night round the schooner was as dumb and complete as if a dead world had been laid to rest in a grave of clouds. We expected him to speak. The necessity within him tore at his lips, There are those who say that a native will not speak to a white man. Error. No man will speak to his master, but to a wanderer and a friend, to him who does not come to teach or to rule, to him who asks for nothing and accepts all. Words are spoken by the campfires, in the shared solitude of the sea, in riverside villages, in resting places surrounded by forests. Words are spoken that take no account of race or color. One heart speaks, another one listens. And the earth, the sea, the sky, the passing wind, and the stirring leaf hear also the futile tale of the burden of life. He spoke at last. It is impossible to convey the effect of his story. It is undying, it is but a memory, and its vividness cannot be made clear to another mind, any more than the vivid emotions of a dream. One must have seen his innate splendor. One must have known him before, looked at him then. The wavering gloom of the little cabin, the breathless stillness outside, through which only the lapping of water against the schooner's sides could be heard. Hollis's pale face with steady dark eyes, the energetic head of Jackson held up between two big palms, and with the long yellow hair of his beard flowing over the strings of the guitar lying on the table. Karain's upright and motionless pose, his tone, all this made an impression that cannot be forgotten. He faced us across the table. His dark head and bronze torso appeared above the tarnished slab of wood, gleaming and still as if cast in metal. Only his lips moved, and his eyes glowed, went out, blazed again, or stared mournfully. His expressions came straight from his tormented heart. His words sounded low, in a sad murmur, as of running water. At times they rang loud, like the clash of a war gong, or trailed slowly, like weary travelers, or rushed forward with the speed of fear. Chapter 4. This is imperfectly what he said. It was after the great trouble that broke the alliance of the 4 states of Wajo. We fought amongst ourselves, and the Dutch watched from afar till we were weary. Then the smoke of their fire ships was seen at the mouth of our rivers, and their great men came in boats full of soldiers to talk to us of protection and peace. We answered with caution and wisdom, for our villages were burnt, our stockades weak, the people weary, and the weapons blunt. They came and went. There had been much talk, but after they went away everything seemed to be as before. Only their ships remained in sight from our coast, and very soon their traders came amongst us under a promise of safety. My brother was a ruler, and one of those who had given the promise. I was young then, and had fought in the war, and Pata Matara had fought by my side. We had shared hunger, danger, fatigue, and victory. His eyes saw my danger quickly, and twice my arm had preserved his life. It was his destiny. He was my friend, and he was great amongst us, one of those who were near my brother, the ruler. He spoke in council. His courage was great. He was the chief of many villages round the great lake that is in the middle of our country, as the heart is in the middle of a man's body. When his sword was carried into a kampong in advance of his coming, the maidens whispered wonderingly under the fruit trees. The rich men consulted together in the shade, and a feast was made ready with rejoicing and song. He had the favor of the ruler and the affection of the poor.
He loved war, deer hunts, and the charms of women. He was the possessor of jewels, of lucky weapons, and of men's devotion. He was a fierce man, and I had no other friend. I was the chief of a stockade at the mouth of the river, and collected tolls for my brother from the passing boats. One day I saw a Dutch trader go up the river. He went up with 3 boats, and no toll was demanded from him, because the smoke of Dutch warships stood out from the open sea, and we were too weak to forget treaties. He went up under the promise of safety, and my brother gave him protection. He said he came to trade. He listened to our voices, for we are men who speak openly and without fear. He counted the number of our spears. He examined the trees, the running waters, the grasses of the bank, the slopes of our hills. He went up to Matara's country and obtained permission to build a house. He traded and planted. He despised our joys, our thoughts, and our sorrows. His face was red, his hair like flame, and his eyes pale like a river mist. He moved heavily and spoke with a deep voice. He laughed aloud like a fool, and knew no courtesy in his speech. He was a big, scornful man who looked into women's faces and put his hand on the shoulders of free men as though he had been a noble-born chief. We bore with him. Time passed. Then Pata Matara's sister fled from the kampong and went to live in the Dutchman's house. She was a great and willful lady. I had seen her once carried high on slave shoulders amongst the people, with uncovered face, and I had heard all men say that her beauty was extreme, silencing the reason and ravishing the heart of the beholders. The people were dismayed. Matara's face was blackened with that disgrace, for she knew she had been promised to another man. Matara went to the Dutchman's house and said, "Give her up to die. She is the daughter of chiefs." The white man refused and shut himself up, while his servants kept guard night and day with loaded guns. Matara raged. My brother called a council, but the Dutch ships were near and watched our coast greedily. My brother said, "If he dies now, our land will pay for his blood. Leave him alone till we grow stronger and the ships are gone." Matara was wise. He waited and watched. But the white man feared for her life and went away. He left his house, his plantations, and his goods. He departed, armed and menacing, and left all for her. She had ravished his heart. From my stockade I saw him put out to sea in a big boat. Matara and I watched him from the fighting platform behind the pointed stakes. He sat cross-legged with his gun in his hands on the roof at the stern of his prow. The barrel of his rifle glinted aslant before his big red face. The broad river was stretched under him, level, smooth, shining like a plain of silver, and his prow, looking very short and black from the shore, glided along the silver plain and over into the blue of the sea. Thrice Matara, standing by my side, called aloud her name with grief and imprecations. He stirred my heart. It leaped 3 times, and 3 times with the eye of the mind I saw in the gloom within the enclosed space of the prow a woman with streaming hair, going away from her land and her people. I was angry and sorry. Why? And then I also cried out insults and threats. Matara said, Now they have left our land, their lives are mine. I shall follow and strike, and alone pay the price of blood." A great wind was sweeping towards the setting sun over the empty river. I cried, "By your side I will go." He lowered his head in sign of assent. It was his destiny. The sun had set, and the trees swayed their boughs with a great noise above our heads. On the third night we two left our land together in a trading prow. The sea met us, the sea, wide, pathless, and without voice. A sailing prow leaves no track. We went south. The moon was full, and looking up we said to one another, "When the next moon shines as this one, we shall return, and they will be dead." It was 15 years ago. Many moons have grown full and withered, and I have not seen my land since. We sailed south. We overtook many prows. We examined the creeks and the bays. We saw the end of our coast, of our island, a steep cape over a disturbed strait where drift the shadows of shipwrecked prows, and drowned men clamor in the night. The wide sea was all round us now. We saw a great mountain burning in the midst of water. We saw thousands of islets scattered like bits of iron fired from a big gun. We saw a long coast of mountain and lowlands stretching away in sunshine from west to east. It was Java. We said, "They are there. Their time is near, and we shall return or die cleansed from dishonor." We landed. Is there anything good in that country? The paths run straight and hard and dusty. Stone kampongs full of white faces are surrounded by fertile fields, but every man you meet is a slave. The rulers live under the edge of a foreign sword. We ascended mountains, we traversed valleys. At sunset we entered villages. We asked everyone, "Have you seen such a white man?" Some stared, others laughed. Women gave us food sometimes with fear and respect, as though we had been distracted by the visitation of God. But some did not understand our language, and some cursed us, or, yawning, asked with contempt the reason for our quest. Once, as we were going away, an old man called after us, "Desist!" We went on. Concealing our weapons, we stood humbly aside before the horsemen on the road. We bowed low in the courtyards of chiefs who were no better than slaves. We lost ourselves in the fields, in the jungle, and one night, in a tangled forest, we came upon a place where crumbling old walls had fallen amongst the trees, and where strange stone idols, carved images of devils with many arms and legs, with snakes twined round their bodies, with 20 heads and holding 100 swords, seemed to live and threaten in the light of our campfire. Nothing dismayed us, and on the road by every fire, in resting places, we always talked of her and of him. Their time was near. We spoke of nothing else, no, not of hunger, thirst, weariness, and faltering hearts. No, we spoke of him and her, of her, and we thought of them, of her. Matara brooded by the fire. I sat and thought, till suddenly I could see again the image of a woman, beautiful and young, and great and proud and tender, going away from her land and her people. Matara said, When we find them, we shall kill her first to cleanse the dishonor. Then the man must die. I would say, it shall be so. It is your vengeance. He stared long at me with his big sunken eyes. We came back to the coast. Our feet were bleeding, our bodies thin. We slept in rags under the shadow of stone enclosures. We prowled, soiled and lean, about the gateways of white men's courtyards. Their hairy dogs barked at us, and their servants shouted from afar, "Begone!" Low-born wretches that keep watch over the streets of stone kampongs asked us who we were. We lied, we cringed, we smiled with hate in our hearts, and we kept looking here, looking there for them. For the white man with hair like flame, and for her, for the woman who had broken faith, and therefore must die. We looked. At last, in every woman's face, I thought I could see hers. We ran swiftly. No, sometimes Matara would whisper, "Here is the man." And we waited, crouching. He came near. It was not the man. Those Dutchmen are all alike. We suffered the anguish of deception. In my sleep I saw her face, and was both joyful and sorry. Why? I seemed to hear a whisper near me. I turned swiftly. She was not there. And as we trudged wearily from stone city to stone city, I seemed to hear a light footstep near me. A time came when I heard it always, and I was glad. I thought, walking dizzy and weary in sunshine on the hard paths of white men, I thought, she is there, with us. Matara was somber. We were often hungry. We sold the carved sheaths of our krises, the ivory sheaths with golden ferrules. We sold the jeweled hilts, but we kept the blades for them. The blades that never touch but kill. We kept the blades for her. Why? She was always by our side. We starved, we begged, we left Java at last. We went west, we went east. We saw many lands, crowds of strange faces, men that live in trees and men who eat their old people. We cut rattans in the forest for a handful of rice, and for a living swept the decks of big ships, and heard curses heaped upon our heads. We toiled in villages. We wandered upon the seas with the Bajo people who have no country. We fought for pay. We hired ourselves to work for Goram men, and were cheated. And under the orders of rough white faces we dived for pearls in barren bays, dotted with black rocks, upon a coast of sand and desolation. And everywhere we watched, we listened, we asked. We asked traders, robbers, white men. We heard jeers, mockery, threats, words of wonder and words of contempt. We never knew rest, we never thought of home, for our work was not done. A year passed, then another. I ceased to count the number of nights, of moons, of years. I watched over Matara. He had my last handful of rice. If there was water enough for one, he drank it. I covered him up when he shivered with cold, and when the hot sickness came upon him, I sat sleepless through many nights and fanned his face. He was a fierce man, and my friend. He spoke of her with fury in the daytime, with sorrow in the dark. He remembered her in health, in sickness. I said nothing, but I saw her every day. always. At first I saw only her head, as of a woman walking in the low mist on a river bank. Then she sat by our fire. I saw her. I looked at her. She had tender eyes and a ravishing face. I murmured to her in the night. Matara said sleepily sometimes, "To whom are you talking? Who is there?" I answered quickly, "No one." It was a lie. She never left me. She shared the warmth of our fire. She sat on my couch of leaves. She swam on the sea to follow me. I saw her. I tell you, I saw her long black hair spread behind her upon the moonlit water as she struck out with bare arms by the side of a swift prow. She was beautiful, she was faithful, and in the silence of foreign countries she spoke to me very low in the language of my people. No one saw her, no one heard her. She was mine only. In daylight she moved with a swaying walk before me upon the weary paths. Her figure was straight and flexible like the stem of a slender tree. The heels of her feet were round and polished like shells of eggs. With her round arms she made signs. At night she looked into my face. And she was sad. Her eyes were tender and frightened, her voice soft and pleading. Once I murmured to her, "You shall not die." And she smiled. Ever after, she smiled. She gave me courage to bear weariness and hardships. Those were times of pain, and she soothed me. We wandered patient in our search. We knew deception, false hopes. We knew captivity, sickness, thirst, misery, despair. Enough! We found them! He cried out the last words and paused. His face was impassive, and he kept still like a man in a trance. Hollis sat up quickly and spread his elbows on the table. Jackson made a brusque movement and accidentally touched the guitar. A plaintive resonance filled the cabin with confused vibrations and died out slowly. Then Karain began to speak again. The restrained fierceness of his tone seemed to rise like a voice from outside, like a thing unspoken but heard. It filled the cabin and enveloped in its intense and deadened murmur the motionless figure in the chair. We were on our way to Atje, where there was war. But the vessel ran on a sandbank, and we had to land in Delhi. We had earned a little money, and had bought a gun from some Selganore traders. Only one gun, which was fired by the spark of a stone. Matara carried it. We landed. Many white men lived there, planting tobacco on conquered plains, and Matara... But no matter. He saw him. The Dutchman, at last. We crept and watched. 2 nights and a day we watched. We had a house, a big house in a clearing in the midst of his fields. Flowers and bushes grew around. There were narrow paths of yellow earth between the cut grass, and thick hedges to keep people out. The 3rd night we came armed, and lay behind a hedge. A heavy dew seemed to soak through our flesh, and made our very entrails cold. The grass, the twigs, the leaves, covered with drops of water, were grey in the moonlight. Matara, curled up in the grass, shivered in his sleep. My teeth rattled in my head so loud that I was afraid the noise would wake up all the land. Afar, the watchmen of white men's houses struck wooden clappers and hooted in the darkness. And, as every night, I saw her by my side. She smiled no more. The fire of anguish burned in my breast, and she whispered to me with compassion, with pity, softly, as women will. She soothed the pain of my mind. She bent her face over me, the face of a woman who ravishes the hearts and silences the reason of men. She was all mine, and no one could see her, no one of living mankind. Stars shone through her bosom, through her floating hair. I was overcome with regret, with tenderness, with sorrow. Matara slept. Had I slept? Matara was shaking me by the shoulder, and the fire of the sun was drying the grass, the bushes, the leaves. It was day. Shreds of white mist hung between the branches of trees. Was it night or day? I saw nothing again till I heard Matara breathe quickly where he lay, and then outside the house I saw her. I saw them both. They had come out. She sat on a bench under the wall, and twigs laden with flowers crept high above her head, hung over her hair. She had a box on her lap, and gazed into it, counting the increase of her pearls. The Dutchman stood by, looking on. He smiled down at her. His white teeth flashed. The hair on his lip was like two twisted flames. He was big and fat and joyous and without fear. Matara tipped fresh priming from the hollow of his palm, scraped the flint with his thumbnail, and gave the gun to me. To me! I took it. Oh, fate! He whispered into my ear, lying on his stomach, I shall creep close and then amok. Let her die by my hand. You take aim at the fat swine there. Let him see me strike my shame off the face of the earth, and then, you are my friend, kill with a sure shot. I said nothing. There was no air in my chest. There was no air in the world. Matara had gone suddenly from my side. The grass nodded. Then a bush rustled. She lifted her head. I saw her, the consoler of sleepless nights, of weary days, the companion of troubled years. I saw her. She looked straight at the place where I crouched. She was there as I had seen her for years, a faithful wanderer by my side. She looked with sad eyes and had smiling lips. She looked at me, smiling lips. Had I not promised that she should not die? She was far off, and I felt her near. Her touch caressed me, and her voice murmured, whispered above me, around me, Who shall be thy companion? Who shall console thee if I die?